Oh wow, email. And it isn't even from ArenaNet. Oh, it's fan mail. Hey, check it out. Hi Mind Circus, I love your YouTube channel. I've learned so much about open world builds from it. You are my favorite content creator, right behind Wooden Potatoes and Mighty Teapot and Muckluck and Nike and Valen and Boots and Lord Heisen and Kroof and Lastic and Tiffy Miss Whiffy and Guild MM and Redeemer and Iron Maiden and Snebzor and Mela and Loranity and Guild Gen and Jebro and Indemir, and Crichton Herald, and Wintertooth 100. I was wondering if you could help me. I really want to be in an open world diva like the rest, and I want to solo champions and stuff, and farm the leather of Lake Doric, and get all my hottest hero points, and I really need a good build and gear setup to kick some ass. I want to play Elementalist. I really want to play Elementalist. That's all I want to play. But everyone knows Ellie is terrible. Oh, sorry. Everyone knows Ellie is a terrible class, does almost no damage, and dies the moment someone sneezes at it. Please help! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Huh. Dear Dear Jill, have you tried playing P.S. I just bought some Black Lion skins and I only have 18 gold. Huh. What's up everyone, you got Mind Circus here in another open world story solo build for Mind Over Meta, and today we're going to be looking at Elementalist, and specifically we'll be looking at Tempest. But before we get started, if you are new to the channel, new to Guild Wars 2, or just haven't done so yet, I am currently farming likes and subscribes in an effort to build the channel, and would greatly appreciate if you hook me up with one of those just below the video. And with that out of the way, hey! Condi Tempest for Open World. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that I took from the first series of Open World videos that I was doing was about gearing for new players, and sometimes it can be really expensive and confusing, especially if it's your first 80. And I agree with that to a certain extent. When it comes to gearing in some of the more popular sets, it can be really, really expensive. Things like Vipers and Trailblazers can be completely out of reach for newer players reaching 80. And as many videos as I might put up about stat selectable armor sets, it's not really going to change that. And of course I could get up on a soapbox about it and offer solutions, etc., but I'm pretty sure ArenaNet knows about it. And over the past couple of years, stat selectable armor has become more and more ubiquitous as a reward. I also think that the current situation is actually a reflection of a bit of gear progression, and as someone who's played many different MMOs, I don't see a massive problem with it actually. Buy what you can afford, upgrade it when you can. So, what I attempted to do here was to generate a build with a gear setup that was not only viable, but enjoyable and cheap. We'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. The other thing I wanted to take a look at here was Elementalist. And man, I hear a lot of complaining about Ellie these days, and unfortunately I just don't agree. I don't want to sit here and talk shit about people who are struggling with the class, but there really does seem to be a little bit of what I'll call intellectual dishonesty about the class's performance, particularly in open world. I see this a lot on the official forums, a little bit on Reddit, and it's become a pretty big meme at this point. So people say it's too squishy, that you can't stay alive long enough to do damage. You get a lot of memes on the subreddit. You see armchair deving everywhere on ways to quote-unquote fix it. And I honestly believe that the vast majority of people that are saying these things are just trying to create a perception issue to argue for a buff. I think the vast majority of the actual honest complaints are actually learn to play issues. So, with all that said, hey, my goal with this build was to create a strong, viable open world build that would provide strong mitigation and sustain, would do enough damage to make things comfortable, and at the same time, I wanted to gear it solely off the trading post for less than 15 gold, and I wanted to do it on Elementalist. So in terms of its performance, well, it's pretty strong. Basic AoE checks were great. Lake Dork Centaurs, Desert Highland Wolves, Pocket Raptors were all super comfortable. This build generates a ton of AoE pressure and also offers a fair bit of stability, which really offers really strong quality of life. Basic open world champions were also predictably smooth. Things like the Giant and Cursed Shore, the Champion Skelk and Mount Maelstrom, etc. were really not a problem. As long as you're dodging the big hits and taking a moment to resustain every once in a while, it does a really good job. Fortunately, Tempest has quite a few options for resustain, so you're golden at that point. So, kicking it up to the next level, HOT hero points, also perfectly doable. This build is strong enough that it does enough damage to solo basic ones without any issue. I did Security Golem, Troll Runestone, Mordrum Flower. They were all completely doable. There's not much else to say here. Harder open world events were also doable. While it wasn't complete face roll like some of the other builds on the channel, it does offer the QOL needed to solo things like the Crucible of Consecration. Now, I'm not going to lie here, this was pretty hard, but I did it. I did it on Ellie, I did it with minimal downstate, and I did it on a build that cost less than 15 gold. Finally, yeah, I soloed a couple desert bounties on this one. The two I usually test were done without any huge issues, but I'm going to be transparent here. The time to kill was higher than if I had done it in, say, Ascended Trailblazers. The demo that you're seeing below, well, I did get nailed with the healing tendrils, which did increase time to kill a fair bit, and if you're watching the screen, you can see I almost ran the timer out. That said, they got done. Not bad for a gear setup fully purchased off the TP. So, let's get into what I think are the strengths and weaknesses of this build. The number one strength is it does a lot of decent raw damage. It does enough damage that nothing became a battle of attrition. In terms of numbers, I was actually keeping in step with a friend of mine's Condi Rev a couple of times. Now, I'm not going to say that happened a lot, but there were moments where it did. It definitely wasn't falling so far behind that I felt like I was playing a crap build with crap gear. It was a very smooth experience. I felt the damage was absolutely fantastic, particularly when we're talking about the gear setup that we'll take a look at in a little bit. The number 2 strength of this build was the sustain. This build is going to use the same tricks I used for sustain on the other 2 Elementalist open world builds that I put up on the channel. It works just fine, does an absolutely great job. It does a lot of passive sustain, and in addition, because we're running Tempest with the Warhorn, is also going to give us a couple of extra options for active sustain that maybe other builds aren't going to have. So absolutely, it's got a lot of tricks in its toolbox, so to speak, and utilizing those is immense quality of life. And finally, this build is cheap. And when I say it's cheap and I say that I have geared it for less than 15 gold, I actually geared it for less than 8 gold. 8 gold to solo a desert bounty, I think, is a decent build. This, you know, when we're talking about the little tests that I do, that means it can handle just about everything you're going to reasonably throw in its path. And it's going to do so in largely some of the cheapest things that you can buy off the TP. In terms of this build's weaknesses, first off, this gear is absolutely not optimized. And when I say it's not optimized, we are, in addition to running exotic gear that we have purchased off the TP, we are running a rabid rare backpack. We are also going to be running Flame Legion runes for the memes. You'll take a look at this in a couple of minutes. And really, it's just a question of having geared it on the cheap and seriously as cheap as possible. So what this really means is that what you're seeing here should be a starting point for you, and once you've got that starting point fully handled, you should start looking at upgrading things, maybe starting with the runes and sigils, but we'll go over all that when we talk at the equipment. Number 2 weakness of this is going to be attunement swapping. If you are one of those players that dislikes attunement swapping on Elementalist, I'm afraid to tell you that this build is not going to be your magic bullet. I don't think there is a magic bullet. I think that really to get the most out of Elementalist, and specifically out of Tempest, you have to be prepared to do a fair bit of attunement dancing. I don't think that there's a decent Elementalist build out there that just camps fire. There's a couple of power builds that'll only sporadically drop out of air, but honestly, on the overall, you know, if you're going to play Elementalist, do be prepared to attunement swap, and do be prepared to, you know, go in and out of those attunements regularly. And the number 3 weakness of this build, and it's not a huge one, it is the fact that we're dealing with Condi damage. And Condi damage in open world is great when you reach a certain part of the game, but for the early game, it's not the preferred way to play. If I'm doing things like a world complete and I'm trying to, you know, go through core maps as quickly as possible, I'm absolutely going to, you know, default to using a power build if I can. That said, the damage is high, it's got a fair bit of burst potential, but you will notice that it would lag behind a basic power build when it came to doing things like, you know, completing hearts and core teria that needed kills, etc. So it's important to keep that in mind. So with all this said, let's look at the gear. And one thing I just want to mention is if you go over the intro to this video, you will see me buying everything for this toon off the trading post. The end cost of everything that I've put together for this video was less than 8 gold. And it's just that simple. We'll go over the options that I picked, but if you need a demonstration, the end of the intro to this video is absolutely me purchasing the gear for this toon. So, if you can stand the fact that it's going by at about 1,000% speed, then great, but it'll give you a good idea, basically, and if you need to freeze frame and actually see what I'm doing, you'll absolutely see it. But let's pull up the build in the gear here at this point, and we'll start with the gear. We'll start here by explaining that we are using what's called dire gear. Now, dire gear is, simply put, a condition damage major with a toughness and vitality minor. This is absolutely cheap gear. And we're going to take a bit of a time out here to see just how cheap this gear is and give you guys a little bit of a clue about buying gear, particularly when you're new, getting it off the trading post. So what we have here is when we go to search for, say, buying things, we're absolutely going to want to come in here and make some changes to our search parameters. So we're going to start by saying we want condition damage gear. We're going to start by saying we also want toughness and we also want vitality. That will say that we're an elementalist, and we'll change our rarities to exotic. We will additionally change the level to 80. With that, we've got our filters on here now, and if we look at chest gears or chest pieces now, we can actually see that we've got a few different options. Now we've got our Trailblazers armor, okay, which we would never want to actually buy exotics of, and it's 13 gold. We have our Celestial gear, which is 19 gold. We have Dire gear, which is 1 gold and 38 silver, but we also have something here called Jotoro's coat. Now, Jotoro's coat is actually dire gear, but it drops far more often than what you're seeing up here, which is actually crafted gear, and it's got the exact same stats. So, kind of crazy, right? But here we're looking at a gold 38, and here we're looking at 31 silver for the coat. We can look here at the leggings, and Jotoro's leggings are only 27 silver. We can look at the gloves. And Jotoro's gloves were 28, although the Dire Exalted gloves were 55. And you're starting to get kind of the idea behind this, that a lot of the popular gear sets actually have a named alternative. And by popular, I don't mean, the meta gear sets, but we will take a look at something here. When we come in here, and let's change this in, for the sake of argument, to power, precision, and ferocity. Now, power, precision, and ferocity is obviously Berserker's gear. And if we take a look here, the Berserker's Exalted gloves are 9 gold and 49 silver, but we've got something down here called Zed's gloves, which are 89 silver. So that is 1/10 the price, or, you can correct me on my math on that. But you start to see the example of what we're talking about here. If we were doing power damage and we wanted Berserker's gear, we could absolutely be gearing our toon for less than 15 gold based on these kind of costs. So we'll go back up here and we'll take a look at the other thing I did, and we'll reset this for the condition damage, for toughness, and for vitality. All right. We'll take a look at weapons, and we'll look at daggers. So what we have are some daggers here. Okay. It may have reset me here, so I will go ahead and put this back to condition, toughness, and vitality. And now we can see some daggers that absolutely do have the right cost. And if we take a look at these here, we have a Dire Ceremonial dagger for 2 gold. We also down here have a Dire Pearl Cleaver, which is the exact same weapon, for 99 silver. So it's really kind of important to start thinking about these things when we're putting it together, that we do have some options that are slightly cheaper. And in this case, as you've seen through, what I've shown you so far is absolutely viable. It's absolutely viable gear. So we've gone ahead and we've done that. So going back to our issue at hand here, we'll get back into the gear without too much more. I have purchased a dire gear for this and set it with Flame Legion runes. The reason why I took the Flame Legion runes are the burning duration increase and the increased damage to burning foes by 7%. It's kind of easy. We know we're going to be doing a lot of fire damage. So then we've got the Dire Ceremonial Dagger of Fire. Okay. We've also got the Warhorn of Rage. And this, again, is a super cheap sigil that will allow us to gain quickness for 3 seconds upon critically hitting a foe with a 20-second cooldown. So a little bit of quickness just for the memes. Going over and taking a look at the trinkets, I have purchased 2 Traveler's Rings. Now, the bonus about using exotic gears, we don't have to worry about using duplicate items. We can absolutely do so. So we've used 2 Traveler's Rings, okay, with a Traveler's Amulet. These, of course, are dire stats, as you see. We've also used 2 Fangs of Tequatl, which are items that drop pretty regularly at the Tequatl event, the world boss, and there we go. We just bought those, so that was cheap enough as well. Additionally, I wasn't able to find a cheap dire backpack, so I went with the next best alternative, and I actually bought a rare backpack, and a rare backpack in rabid stats, just because it was the one with the most condition damage. And there we have it. This is viable gear. It's not optimal gear, but it's absolutely viable. Now, to put all this into perspective, the build that I'm going to show you in a few minutes, I actually run in Trailblazers, usually. And what I did was adapted the dire gear to it. Simple enough. So when I go over here into my other gear set, you can take a look, and I am running this all with Nightmare Runes in Trailblazers gear, okay? And of course there are some differences there. You know, I'm running it with Sigil of Bursting, and it gets back to the same thing. You know, this is your starter gear. After you've gotten this far, we'll start thinking about better runes than the Flame Legion runes. We'll start thinking about a better sigil than, you know, the Sigil of Fire. We'll start looking at things like a Bursting Sigil and things like that. But all those things cost money. And if you get to level 80 and you think, well, I have to be in full Vipers, or I have to be in full Trailblazers, and I need this Sigil of Bursting, and I need this, and I need this, then it all becomes so overwhelming that we don't realize that we can be viable on a budget before we go out there and start, you know, start improving what we have. So think about it as gear progression, and think about it as starting here. With all that said, and a little bit of a soapbox moment there, let's go over to the build. Now, the build is pretty simple. The build, we're going to be running Fire, we're going to be running Earth, we're going to be running Tempest. Under Fire, we're going to be taking Burning Precision. Burning you inflict, it has increased duration, and your critical hits gain a chance to inflict burning. There we go. Hopefully, you know, as we crit, we will be bringing this up. That said, we don't have a ton of precision, so we're not going to be critting all that much, but it is also a value due to the burning that we'll provide. Our next choice here is going to be Burning Rage, and this is Burning Rage Sunspot inflicts burning. Its radius is increased, your condition damage is increased, and what Sunspot is gain Fire Aura and damage nearby foes when you attune to fire. So every time we attune to fire, we'll be bolstering the, putting a little AoE down on that, and giving ourselves a Condi damage increase. You know, Pyromancer's training also comes as part of this. Your fire weapon skills gain reduced recharge, deal increased strike damage to burning foes. Now, the strike damage we don't get as much value out of, but you know, getting a 20% increase out of our recharge a decrease out of our recharge rate is absolutely fantastic. Finally, we will be running Pyromancer's Puissance. Pyromancer's Puissance gain might for using any skill while attuned to fire. When leaving the fire attunement or successfully completing a fire overload, unleash a flame expulsion. This is just straight up more damage and some might. There's just no two ways about it. It's a big win in both directions. Let's look here under Earth, where we're going to be getting a little bit more Condi damage increases. First off, we'll be using Serrated Stones. Bleeding you inflict has increased duration, deal increased damage to bleeding foes. We will be running Strength of Stone. Gain condition damage based on your toughness. Inflict bleeding when you immobilize a foe. This is a pretty serious Condi damage increase, so let's keep that in mind. It's pretty decent, and it's based on our toughness. So since we're using this dire gear, we're going to get some pretty good value out of it. Finally, we will be running Written in Stone. Written in Stone we are going to be running because it actually maintains the passive benefit from our Signet of Restoration at all times. Signet of Restoration is going to provide a large amount of the passive sustain on this build. We'll be getting a little bit of increased healing, or a little bit of passive healing, as we are just playing through. And then we've got the options of using this Signet with impunity because of the trait, and we've got some options under the water attunement for active resustain. So there we go. Finally, let's take a look at Tempest. Under Tempest, we will be running Unstable Conduit. Unstable Conduit says grants an aura based on your attunement after you do an overload. Now, for those of you who don't know Tempest, we'll go over it a little bit in the gameplay section, but every time you're attuned to a element, you've got something up here called an overload. The overloads are really powerful skills. We'll also be packing an aura on top of these. Now, the auras are absolutely really powerful effects. For example, the Frost Aura is a minus 10% incoming damage. The Magnetic Aura is 4 seconds of projectile hate. So these are really, really powerful effects that you definitely want to be leveraging. Our next one is we will be taking Harmonious Conduit. We'll be running gain stability and swiftness when starting an overload, so we'll be packing those overloads down with a little bit of stab. This is, something that I've mentioned in quite a few of my open world videos, that stability is a really big quality of life improvement, and taking a trait that will grant us this on a regular basis can do nothing but good to us. Finally, we will be running Transcendent Tempest. Time to attain singularity is reduced upon successfully completing an overload, gain increased damage. This means that we'll have access to these overloads that we've been packing with these other effects, and really that can do nothing but good. In terms of options on this one, really there aren't any for the Grandmaster. The Lucid Singularity is a little bit better when we are using it, when we're using Tempest in competitive, and Elemental Bastion is good for support. You can look at using Eye of the Storm if you're getting punted around a little bit, and what this will do is grant you super speed and break your stun automatically on a 40-second cooldown, which can be super important, but I really go back in favor Unstable Conduit on this one, and that's kind of it. There aren't a whole lot of choices on this build. I just want to be super clear about that, particularly when we're talking about Earth. This Written in Stone is the reason that we're taking the line to pad our passive resustain easily. So keep that in mind. I don't think there's a whole lot of options when it comes to this build and making it work correctly. So with all that said, hey, let's take a couple of seconds and look at the fashion. So as I set myself a little goal with the build and the gear, particularly with the gear, as I mentioned before, I also set myself a little goal with the fashion on this one, and that was not to use anything from the gem store. Everything had to be particularly earned in-game, which was fun. Nice little fun, but it actually ended up putting me in the poorhouse with my transmutation charges, but we'll just leave it at that. We will start with the Council Ministry Circlet. The Council Ministry Circlet is earned in Caudicus's Manor in the dungeon. And those of you who are kind of looking for, interesting alternatives for cool armor pieces, I will always steer you towards the dungeon armor sets. The dungeon armor sets are some of the more interesting armor sets in the game. If you are somebody who doesn't value the particle effects, you will find a lot of really cool options in dungeons. We will be running the Vigil's Honor Mantle. The Vigil's Honor Mantle is gained by being a member of the Vigil. Every order in the game, so the Order of Whispers, the Priory, and the Vigil, all have a vendor, two vendors actually, one that sells some weapon skins and one that sells some armor skins. The Vigil has a lot of really cool pieces. The Order of Whispers has a lot of very, very cool pieces, and specifically the Order of Whispers also has some really cool weapon skins as well. And again, all of these are earned in-game, and I highly recommend you take a look at them. Our next is going to be the Mist Shard Gambeson. The Mist Shard Gambeson is gained in Dragonfall. There are two versions of it. You have the Mist Shard, and I believe it's called the Blossoming Mist Shard version, which is the over-the-top particle effect version. I quite like this one, so I used it. And again, not super hard to get in Dragonfall. We will be using the Ascalon Performer Gloves. The Ascalon Performer Gloves are gained again in Caudicus's Manor Dungeon, so there we have it. We also have the Ornate Guild Pants. The Ornate Guild Pants are actually some of the coolest armor skins for light armor in the game, especially for leggings, and they are gained by being in a guild that is of a sufficiently high level, and then purchasing the option to craft those and crafting them. Not super expensive, but that said, you do need to be part of a good guild to get access to that vendor. Finally, we will be using the Inquest shoes. The Inquest armor is also from dungeons, but like so many other Asura boots, they could be easily replaced by anything else, but these ones specifically are earned in the Crucible of Eternity. So there you go. In terms of the weapon skins, I actually left the default weapon skins from the ceremonial pieces on because I quite like the look, and they've got those cool little tassels and everything. We are using the ceremonial dagger of fire, and we are using the ceremonial warhorn of rage. And again, these are just the skins that actually came on the weapons themselves, and I quite like, so I kept them on her. And that, my friends, is our fashion. Alright, so let's get into the gameplay section. Before we do, we will take a quick look at how I've set up the bar on this toon. Signet of Restoration is the heal. This is non-negotiable. The reason why is the passive on this grants the heals every time you cast a spell. We've obviously tied that into the trait, which will keep this on us at all times. So this is your heal right here. You don't want to change that. Additionally, I'm going to be running Signet of Fire. Now, I run Signet of Fire because it is huge DPS. We will get improved critical chance off this, which is kind of nice. It's not, you know, huge, but it is 180 precision, which will help us, as you saw with one of the traits earlier. But really, it's you know, it's 2 seconds of 2 stacks of 17 seconds of burning, dealing a total of 12,000 damage. It's massive burn, and I highly suggest you use it. Next, we will be running Feel the Burn. Now, Feel the Burn is going to do a little bit of burning damage. It's additionally going to generate us some might, and it's actually going to generate that might and some fire aura to people around us. So, you know, while not being a full support toon, this is not a super selfish build, and I like Feel the Burn for that reason. There are other options, obviously. I'm going to be running Aftershock. Aftershock is, as I mentioned earlier, going to give us Magnetic Aura, which represents 4 seconds of projectile hate. It's going to dump Protection on us, which is obviously really powerful because that's minus 40% incoming damage. It's also going to provide a little bit of soft CC in the form of Cripple and Immob, which is really nice. But most importantly, I'm running it because it is a blast finisher, and we'll take a look at that in a couple of seconds. Finally, I am going to be running the Fiery Greatsword. Fiery Greatsword is a great, fun skill. Depending on how you feel about conjure weapons, there is one other option I could recommend here, and that is running Rebound. Rebound is not great for the actual purpose of the skill, but the other things loaded onto the skill, I guess is the best way to put it. You know, what Rebound will do is, you know, basically rebound the next incoming lethal attack. But, you know, the situational use of this power is not great. That said, this can dump, you know, fire aura or an aura, depending on our attunement, down, and generate some fury as well, which is really nice, and happens on 10 people. So, you know, I wouldn't want to discount Rebound, but where I've been having the most success is by using the Fiery Greatsword. Now, one of the reasons I've been using the Fiery Greatsword, and we'll just go over this really quickly, is when I was doing desert bounties, obviously sometimes you get that inside-outside leyline modifier, and this is some really good ranged effects. Now, some of the other impacts that we'll get off this are obviously the 5, which is a nice big AoE. We get some mobility on the 3 and the 4, and by mobility we also get a fair bit of damage off the 3, so that is really good as well, so I quite enjoy that one. Number 2, just some burning, and then the 1 where we can just keep auto attacking on that. So I run the Fiery Greatsword on this build. You know, there are obviously other ways to play it. That said, I got the most fun running the Fiery Greatsword. So in terms of doing damage on this build, obviously we can get up here and start auto attacking. We'll be generating a minor amount of burning at this point, but if we go into our 2, we're going to get a whole bunch more stacks of burn. Okay, now our 3 is a bit of a mobility power, which will send us flying towards our target. Okay, and that obviously, if they are standing in our path, is going to do some damage. In terms of the Warhorn skills, let's take a look at that. The first thing I'm going to use Warhorn 5 for is for its combo field, which then I am going to pop like that, and you can see our might starting to generate pretty high there at that point. If we go into Feel the Burn, we've got more, and then at that point, if we hit our Signet of Fire and we go into our Dagger 3, we're going to be doing a serious amount of damage at that point. So that really is it. The other option that we have here is obviously the Fire Overload, which we have obviously, if you remember our build, loaded with a few different effects, including the Fire Aura, which is really, really powerful. And if you see there, we are capped on 25 stacks of might without using any kind of might generation sigil or anything like that. So that's obviously a really big win. So again, you know, in terms of doing the damage on this build, it's mostly going to come from fire. We'll go over the Earth Attunement in a few moments, but again, we will pop the field, lay down Feel the Burn, hit our Overload, hit Heat Sink, and then really start to lay that burning down. And those numbers are not bad at all. Those are pretty good numbers. So that's kind of the down and dirty of it. When we look at the Earth Attunement, the Earth Attunement will get a little bit of hurt by the 3, which is very much like the 3 on the fire. We'll be getting bleeding damage this way with the 2, and then we'll just be laying some bleeds down. If you see, those bleeds are stacking up pretty quickly. It's pretty impressive. Now if we go into the Overload on the F4, this is obviously going to be generating, and if you see that, that's a fair bit of soft CC as well, and we'll take a little bit of look at the CC in a few moments, and then we can go back to the fire and start doing our thing. Now in terms of the resustain, because of the trait that we're using, we should never be afraid to click our signet. And when I say click, obviously I mean just generate it like that to heal up. But we can also just drop over here into the water attunement, and we can run the 4 and the 5. Okay, which are going to be bringing us back a lot of resustain, and the Overload, which is actually a very powerful heal specifically for us and also helps the people around us. So pretty powerful thing there. And if you see, just by auto attacking, we're generating a fair bit of vulnerability on the water attunement as well. So that's where we're going to use it. The air attunement I'm not going to be using very much, but we will go over its use now when I talk about the break bar. We've got obviously a few different options for the break bar. We will start in air, and we will get a fair bit off the air 4. That is some really strong break bar hate right there. We'll also get a little bit of soft CC, okay, off Aftershock, which is nice. Going into Earth, okay, the Earth 5 has some blinding, which will give us some soft CC as well. Not great amounts, but just a little bit there, you see that. And then obviously we can go into the Overload, which will dump down a few conditions that will do that there. Additionally, we have the option of going into water and hitting the 3 and the 4. The 3 is going to be provide us chilled, and the 4 is a knockback, which are also really, really strong CCs. So this build doesn't actually want for CC, both hard and both hard and soft CC. It really kind of does its tricks. So there you have it, my friends. This is Open World Condi Tempest, built for less than 8 gold. And really, I'm happy with the build. As I've said, really, and we do want to keep this in mind, and I don't want to, leave you without, again, impressing this upon you. This is a starting point. This is a starting point where you can start, running a decent, strong, well-geared build that will eventually help you make the money to become more and more strong. It's step 1 of progression, is basically the best way to put it. And with all that said, hey, gonna thank you guys all very much for watching, particularly those of you who have made it through the video, those of you who have been commenting and taking part in the little community that's kind of been built around these videos. I really, really appreciate your time and your attention on this. And finally, I'm going to say, hey, have fun in game and min-max your real life, and we'll see you again in the mists.